Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for being willing to share about your insights and in community building. Would you like to introduce yourself and the community that you care for?
Sure. So my name is Courtney. My partner Matt and I run something called Friend Cult. And I think the way that we talk about Friend Cult, we talk about it in a couple of different ways. One of the ways we talk about it is like secular friend church, but functionally what it looks like is it's a weekly Oakland-based dinner gathering. And the whole point is to create kind of a regular recurring space for people to get together, see their friends, meet new people, have kind of like those long meandering conversations that I feel like a lot of us used to have in our early 20s in that like, living room hangout vibe when we were all living with a pile of roommates. And we don't really have that a lot anymore. So we wanted to recreate that. So that's Friend Cult.
Hmm. Sounds ideal and so needed, and secular options for gathering and like consistent community building. I'm very excited to hear more about this.
Yeah, excited to share.
Is there anything else before we get into more specific questions that you want to share about Friend Cult or what you and Matt do?
No, I feel like that kind of covers it. I'll get into it as we ask questions, if that's all right.
Great, let's do it. So, one of the things that I want to know about Friend Cult is how did you what's the genesis story of Friend Cult? What inspired you personally or collectively or between you and Matt? What were you finding was missing and that Friend Cult might fulfill?
Yeah, I think, we say that it's not a pandemic story, but I think, the pandemic affected a lot of us in a lot of different ways. And so it was around that time, probably like 2021, 2022, where Matt and I were just kind of realizing like we didn't know how we were spending our time. Time kind of just felt like a mush. And I think that combined with like a family member got really sick. And it just kind of crystallized for us the importance of being mindful of where our time is going, right? Like, are we spending our time doing the shit that we care about, that we should be doing before we die, right? And it was during that time that we realized specifically the way we were spending time with the people we cared about, family, but also like friends and community was very different from previous times in our lives. Especially on the friend front. I don't know if this resonates with you at all, but all of our friend hangouts had become very scheduled. It was like texting back and forth and calendar Tetris and all of this to see somebody, usually like, okay, we'd go on like a double date with like two of our friends for brunch on the weekend. And that was great. But it was 3 weeks of planning to get 2 hours of brunch. And then like those people don't know any of our other friends. It's very much like spokes on a wheel instead of kind of an interconnected network, which is what we used to have. And so it was like realizing that gap that kind of motivated us to create Friend Cult. I think first it was just a personal problem. And then as we started talking to our friends, we realized that a lot of people had this problem and a lot of people had just kind of resigned themselves to like, well, that's just what adult life is like. That's just what life in your 30s and beyond is like. Maybe it's something you can have in high school and college, but we just don't get to have it anymore. And I think Matt and I were like, no, we could have this. We're user researchers by trade. So we're like, okay, let's do a research project
Oh,
about it. Let's figure out like, okay, if we were doing this to create products for tech companies, could we create a product or a community or an experience for ourselves to solve this problem that we have that we're noticing a lot of other people have? And then that was kind of like the genesis for Friend Cult. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, we quit our day jobs and we're like, let's try to do this full time and see where it takes us.
hmm. Wow, I love that it came from research. Is there any insights that you had in the research that like themes or insights that inspired the way that you structured Friend Cult?
Yeah, absolutely. So there were a couple of things that we realized basically, to answer the question of like, why could we have this before and why don't we have it now? And those obstacles are things that we've specifically worked really hard in Friend Cult to overcome. Um, so the first is the texting, calendar Tetris, all of that. You have to make it a ritual, right? And so that's why we have it every single week, every Wednesday. So that way you don't have to plan it, you don't have to coordinate with friends. It's there. You either show up or you don't. And the second piece of it is why it's on a Wednesday rather than on a weekend. And that's because people are incredibly busy on the weekends. You know, everybody's traveling, there's weddings and baby showers and family obligations and things like that. And so the middle of the week is when people can carve out regular time. And then the last thing is food. We offer food because that's kind of the main thing that gets people out of the house on a Wednesday night. So the confluence of those three things are kind of like the scaffolding of it. Um, and the other thing that we've done is a lot of kind of cultural change or structuring. I think we were noticing that there were a lot of things about American culture that would kind of step on its own toes, right? So as we would describe this to people, they would think about their reference point was, oh, so it's like a dinner party. Okay, so I have to like dress up. I have to come right at 6. I have to stay until 10. So then maybe that sounds like a lot of work. So I won't go. And for us, it's like that's totally unnecessary, right? So like stripping away all of those things and really creating something that feels like drop-in culture, right? That house that you used to go to when you were in college where you could just drop in and see who was there and hang out and leave whenever. So that's kind of how we've got it run. It's an open house from 6 to 10. So folks can come in whenever works for their schedule. They can stay for 30 minutes, just long enough to have a bite, say a hello, and then leave. Or they could stay for all 4 hours if they want and just kind of have meandering conversation until closing time.
Hmm. It sounds ideal. I'm like, we need front court in every place. I really appreciate that combination of the ritual and the flexibility. Is there a sense of how you create belonging and trust within that ritual and consistency and flexibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the work is done up front. I mean, in terms of building a cohesive community, first of all, we're called friend cult, right? So we're not for everybody. Like I think people will see that and have a reaction in either direction, right? And so I think first of all, the branding and the name kind of self-select for a certain type of person, maybe folks who tend to be a little bit more like alt either in their style or their perspectives and maybe just a little bit more experimental. So I think that it kind of self-selects for those folks, but we also have an interview process and we have values that we share during those interviews. And I think the values help set the
Hmm.
stage for folks. So it either attracts folks who already align with those values or it helps to kind of prime how we interact in the space. Um, so, for example, one of our biggest values is kill the stranger. So, kill the stranger sounds scary, but this is all about how we want folks to interact with each other, right? So, it's, folks saying, like, yes, I will kill the stranger in myself by opening up and sharing who I am and letting folks get to know the authentic me. Something that we feel very strongly about is this shouldn't feel like the office or like a networking event where you're just kind of skipping across the surface. It's very performative, making space for folks to open up and share who they are and be appreciated for who they are. And then the flip side is killing the stranger in others. And this is all about greeting folks with curiosity instead of judgment. We've got a wide array of folks in the cult, which is really nice. It feels very East Bay. And as a result, there are naturally going to be some, changes in perspective, some differences of opinion. And
Hmm.
when that happens, it's really important for us to greet each other with curiosity. Like, let's go like, oh, this is so interesting. Like, let me appreciate this person, even if they're very different from me, rather than jumping straight to judgment, which I think is, you know, a problem that a lot of people are struggling with these days.
Yeah.
Setting the rules to be like, when we are here, we kill the stranger helps to kind of prime the experience and have a shorthand in those moments where there might be tensions, though, fortunately, there haven't really been.
Hmm. That's a beautiful value. I love how much it captures in terms of your ethos around belonging and connection. Is there other values that you have structured and lead friend cult by?
Yeah, and obviously they all have like kind of culty intense twists. Um, you
Stay
know,
on theme.
yeah, exactly. I mean, Matt and I are kind of like gothy witchy by nature, so it's we come by it honestly, I guess. Yeah, so two other values. One is called Conjure New Culture. And so this is all about the idea that we believe people have the power to change the culture that they're a part of, right? Like the idea being if you don't like it, you can change it. And so, inviting folks to think about coming to Friend Cult as a vote for a culture that they want to see more of in the world. I think specifically, through the lens of this conversation and community more largely, as we were starting this project, we saw a lot of social media posts where people would say like, oh, the death of community, like capitalism stepping on my neck, that's why I can't have friends. And like yes, absolutely, capitalism is a very real problem. But there are many places that exist under capitalism that still prioritize community. And so that was really the genesis for us of helping people feel like they had the power to participate in an alternative, and perhaps a little bit of a responsibility too, right? And then our last value is called choose good gods. So choose good gods is all about the idea that we think of time and attention as forms of worship. There's about like 100 waking hours in a week, and you get to choose what gods you're devoting that to, right? Like, is that the god of work or the god of family obligations or the god of screen time or community? Like, you get to choose. And so for us, it's all about, making sure that you're paying attention to like the balance of gods that you're worshiping. Like, it's totally fine. Like, we're not like a crazy mindful, you have to be aware of your time and attention at all times. Like, that's unrealistic. But leaning on ritual as a way to help you prioritize those things, right? Like, we literally created friend cult as a ritual to make sure that we were prioritizing time with friends and community. And it's just a value that we really like, and we like to kind of solicit ideas from our cultists if they have kind of life hacks or practices or rituals in their own lives to make sure that they're balancing things and focusing on the things that are important. Yeah, so those are our other two
Mm,
plays.
mm. They are three very solid values. You mentioned that you do an onboarding process with people. I'm curious because I see how often onboarding is really important to clarity and belonging, that I imagine other people who are listening to this and community builders may be curious about the format or the structure or the approach that you take to onboarding for the sake of clarity and for belonging. Are you down to guide me through what that looks like and what that involves?
Yeah, I mean, with the caveat that, like I talked about with you earlier, Matt and I are on the, not the cusp of burnout, but like we're realizing that what we're doing right now is very high touch and perhaps not sustainable long term. So I will say that I feel like we've created a very successful, cohesive group of folks. And also, I'm curious if there are ways for us to do it in like a lower touch
Mhm.
way. But what we do right now is, folks will learn about Friend Cult and, kind of put in their interest. And then we have half-hour Zoom calls with everybody. So they're, one part interview to get to know them, and then one part us sharing our philosophy, including the values I just mentioned. Um, and so I don't know if it's needed for us to continue and if it's needed for all communities, but I do think having a moment, be that an intake interview or the first visit or whatever that looks like, um, to say like, hey, here's what we're trying to create. Are you bought in? Does this feel like your vibe? And here are the values, and are you on board with those? I think for us, it's really important to allow people to self-select out. I think people do that far more than we say no to people, because for me and for Matt, I don't know, there's a lot of talk about, the isolation epidemic and the fact that we're increasingly more lonely and the need for community. But I think in order to build a successful community, you have to think mindfully of the folks that you have in that community. Um, if you've heard of Priya Parker's book, The Art of Gathering, I love that book. I
Mm-hmm.
talk to people about it all the time. She has this piece where she talks about mindfully closing the door or politely closing the door. I forget exactly how she frames it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it can feel really scary, and it has felt really scary for me and for Matt in the early days to say no to somebody or to be very explicit about these are what our values are. I'm always worried about like, are we scaring people off? Things like that. And I don't want to scare people off, but at the same time I want to be upfront about what we're creating and allow people to decide, yes, this is the space that I want to participate in, or no, it's not. And that's a perfect, either of those are perfectly fine answers.
Mm. Mm. I can see the intentionality that you have in how you've created Friend Cult and how that aligns with Priya Parker's work and how thoughtfully she navigates that. I'm curious about there's a part of me that wants to, I think she talks about generous exclusion, and there's a part of me that just wants to go on like that pathway there. But I want to come back to you mention about like potentially reassessing how to be more low touch and adjusting perhaps onboarding or the structure of of friend cult to be more realistic with your capacity. Is there anything you want to share about that as you exploring what that may look like?
Yeah, I think it's very much a work in progress right now. So I don't have answers, but in terms of a general approach, I think Matt, my partner, both romantic partner and co-cult leader, has been very helpful in maintaining that perspective. I think for me, I can get very tied up in the details of, oh, here's this like beautiful high touch solution that we've come up with that we know solves the problem. Therefore, I must just keep doing it forever as we scale. And he's been really helpful at kind of pulling back and trying to understand, like, okay, well, what are we achieving with this, right? Like, what do we achieve with the intake interviews? What do we achieve with like we have commandments as people come in the door that kind of help to reset the stage. You know, can we achieve that with something else? And so experimenting with that. And I think that perspective shift and the willingness to experiment are two really important skills that he brings to the table that I'm not always comfortable with. Like I like to have a plan and I like to stick with it. So I appreciate his adaptability to that because I do think that that's one of the secrets to a resilient community and to being able to create something and have it not just be like a flash in the pan where we're going as fast as we can and then we burn out and we're like, oh, the whole thing's gone. So trying to find a way for it to shift so it continues, even if that
Mm-hmm.
shifting might mean it doesn't look exactly like it looked at the beginning.
Mm. I'm sure that's very relatable for a lot of people of that, like having a plan and then realizing that you might need to adapt or iterate or experiment and then changing along the way. Is there, how long have you been running Friend Cult for?
Um, So we piloted it out of our apartment starting in August of 23. But then
Mm-hmm.
we launched it fully in like a rented venue out in the wilds, April of last year. So it's been like a
Okay.
year and a bit. Yeah.
Hmm. That's my next question was about perhaps some of the myths that you had perhaps subscribed to in your first year of friend cult that maybe you're coming to realize isn't true for you and Matt or true for what you're creating. Is there any insights that you have for people who may be at the very beginning of community building or within that first year?
Yeah, I think if you'll allow me to reframe it a little bit from like myths into lessons I've learned, I think. Um,
Absolutely.
I think there's three things that come to mind. One is taking a break. I know that that might sound a little bit trite, but I think for me, I've always kind of naturally been a gatherer. Like I was that person who was, having the dinner parties, pulling together the people, organizing like the giant Halloween costumes. And so for me, this felt very natural. And I was like, oh, well, this is just a thing that I do. Like, let's just expand it and make it bigger. Um, and in that single-mindedness, because it was very all-encompassing to start, I forgot that there were so many other pieces of my life that I do really enjoy and like tending to those other things. And so I think that balance in all things, right? Just because this is a thing that I like sushi. If you gave it to me every single day, I would start to hate sushi. So being able to have that balance and remember, like, oh, okay, so there are these things that I like. This is one of them, but let's have that balance and continue to have that balance. That's a really important one. Um, Oh, the other one that I've realized that's really important is changing gears between being a creator and being a consumer. Not consumer in like the buying things way, but consumer as in taking in the world around you. I think that's something that I've realized a little late, but recently in a very salient way, that it's really important for me to shift between being somebody who's putting something on, who's facilitating, who's creating. And while I get a lot out of that, I also need to shift gears and remember to take in other people's art and absorb other cultures and put myself in positions where I can kind of be the passive recipient of the things that other people have created. It's really replenishing, it's really energizing, and not doing it from the lens of like, oh, let me go take in somebody's art to see how I can turn it into something that exists at Friend Cult. It's not for a purpose. It's just for the pure reason of like sitting back and absorbing and enjoying something that somebody else has created, which I think a lot of times with Friend Cult, Matt and I are the ones doing the creating and we enjoy doing that. But again, that balance and flipping back and forth is really important.
Hmm.
Um, and then The last one, oh, yeah. It's funny as somebody who creates community, but the importance of having a community of peers. I think at a certain point, there's this organization called Build IRL, and they reached out to us, and they're kind of like an incubator for in-person communities. They had reached out to us, and there was a night that they had an event, and it happened to be like a really hard day where Matt and I were just kind of like burnt out and exhausted, and we were like, I don't want to talk about community anymore. I'm, swimming in it all the time. Um, we went to this event that they had, and it was just so energizing and reassuring and lovely to be in a group of a bunch of people who are creating their own in-person communities. So I think having that network of people it's a very unique group of people. It's not the same as just being in a community of people that you've created, but being in a community of other community creators is so important, and it can help make it feel a lot less intimidating and a lot less isolating, I think.
Hmm. Hmm. That's real. Yeah, instead of just being lots of little communities coexisting, it's how to find the threads between everyone that are doing the same thing or like trying to create similar things in similar ways. Mm. And so what does the structure of that look like with is it Join IRL, did you say?
Build IRL.
Build IRL.
Although there is another guy named Jared Joyner who's got a group called Joiners. So I'm always joking that he's got like the perfect last name to do this. Um, but I don't think it's been a formal thing. They had a cohort of folks that they were helping to kind of get their groups off the ground. But I think just knowing that that's a resource, it's been so valuable, right? In those moments where I might feel like I'm kind of beating my head against a wall to be like, oh, there is this resource that I could reach out to. Like I could, reach out to Colt and Sam and say like, hey, want to grab a coffee? I just really need to like talk some things through, and knowing that they're there. And so I think
Mm.
that that's a group that is, that network of folks for me and for Matt is still growing, but the reminder of how helpful that can be in those moments, that you don't have to solve it all yourself. And in fact, nobody has ever solved anything on their own. So, and that
Shocking.
includes, yeah, right. And that includes building a community. So, yeah.
Mm. Mm. Oh, I'm so glad that you have that. I think a lot of people do struggle with the isolation of wanting to create community and feeling like they have to create it all themselves. What's the structure? Is it like a membership structure? How does that work? Is there payment involved? Is there uh, perhaps responsibilities or expectations of members? What does that membership structure in general look like?
Yeah. So we have monthly membership dues, and then folks will pay for their food on top of that. So since we're dinner based, so folks pay dues, and those dues allow us to rent our private club space once a month, and then the other nights we're out at restaurants, which is a new model that we're experimenting with. Um, and in terms of expectations for folks to contribute, I do think that that's something that Matt and I are thinking about, and how we can lean into that a little bit more. I think we have a group of great folks who are very willing and interested to participate more actively and help, but we haven't been able to give them a structure to help them help us, if that makes sense. I think, there's a lot of talk of when folks create communities or build communities that there's like a pressure, or you kind of become the everything person, right? And how to not become the everything person is something that Matt and I are still wrestling with. We haven't done a great job so far. So in terms of contributions, there's not like explicit expectations of folks. We don't tell people you have to come to X number of gatherings a month or things like that. Again, wanting to enable that drop in, not recreate the obstacles that keep people from having these things in their lives. Um, yeah, and the dues pay for really the rent, and other operating expenses. At the moment, Matt and I don't make much money for ourselves. So
Hmm. I'm curious as you go how you're going to experiment with that, as you said, like finding new ways of what does this serve and the structures that are supportive for you and Matt that are also supportive for members.
yeah, I think it will definitely take a bit of thinking, but I would love to see if we could deputize some of those cultural pieces. So the onboarding or the interviewing process, if there's ways for us to share that with our cultists. to kind of let them in on the way that we've been approaching it, and ask if folks would be willing to take shifts doing that. I think it's nice to see ways that that has kind of already happened. When we have folks come in for the first time, we have them sign in at the front, and people kind of keep an eye out, which is nice. Like, usually when we're at our club space, at least I'm the one who's kind of keeping an eye out on the door, and because I've interviewed everybody, like, I recognize everybody, and so I know if this is their first time coming in. But there was a night where I just I got caught up in conversation. I mean, I think one thing that's nice is that I also get to participate in friend cult. It's not just like I'm
Hmm.
the manager of the experience. So I got caught up in a conversation with somebody, and one of our members came up to us, and she was like, new blood, like that's what we call the new folks coming in. And she had greeted this person at the door because she was like, hey, I didn't recognize him, and it's his first time here. And so she came to come get me, to let me know, like, hey, there's this new person. um, you know so I didn't kind of have to keep my eye on the ball in that way. It was nice to know that the community would kind of keep track of itself. And so I think there's definitely ways where we can extend that, where it's like, okay, let's have folks practice sharing kind of the intro spiel or the commandments, the ways of interacting in the space, and then they can welcome people in the, like, as they come in the door. So it can be a little bit more organic like that. But yeah, we haven't thought of specifics yet.
Hmm. Well, perhaps we can have another chat once you'll have restructured what that might look like.
Yeah,
Is
would
there
love to.
anything else at this stage? Great. Is there anything else at this stage of reassessing how to make things supportive for you and Matt that you think Friend Cult needs to grow and be sustainable?
I mean, I think it's very much what we've been talking about, of finding ways for folks to contribute. And I think it's still a little bit of an open question. But yeah, I think that level of contribution will be helpful. We're also shifting to a model now where we're bouncing around to different local bars and restaurants. So originally, we were every single week we were at this rented club space, this private space that we had in downtown Oakland. And that just became too labor intensive for me and Matt to do the setup and the hosting and the breakdown every week. And so moving to this new model makes it a lot more sustainable for us. So, the idea of still having, monthly nights at the club space where we can have kind of like a bigger to do and maybe more activities or maybe a theme around the evening. But then having these other kind of more low key gatherings for the other weeks. That's something that we're working into right now to make it more sustainable, just from like a big shift. And I think the cultural pieces we're still playing with.
Mm-mm. How do you choose your venues? I know that's something that a lot of people struggle with events and hosting, that it can feel quite intimidating. Do you have any tips for how you choose venues and approach them?
I'm not sure how applicable this is for folks just starting out, but like the path that we took as friend cult has kind of naturally led to, basically, when we were doing it every week at the club space, we would cater in food from local restaurants. And so over the course of the last year, I've gotten to know a lot of these folks. I have like a repository of like Oakland restaurant owners in my phone now. And so, the first step of what we're exploring is just kind of going back to some of those connections that we've made and saying, like, hey, we've been ordering from you. Our folks love your food. What if we came to you instead? And I think, there is an opportunity for this to be really helpful in both directions, where, they already have the space, and depending on what their Wednesdays look like, we can bring them a ton of folks. And so I think that there could be a really nice symbiotic relationship there. We've only tried it out a couple of times, but so far it's worked quite well. And, you know, I think there's no shortage of great spots in Oakland, which is really nice. So
Hmm, great. I'm I on that theme of like people having a desire to build community and to host events, but maybe feeling as though getting started is intimidating. Is there any 101 hosting or event insights that you have for someone who might be like, how do I do this in the simplest way possible?
yeah, I think, okay, so a couple of things. Listing 101, I'm going to put a pin in that. I'll come back to it. But I think one thing that's really important and has been really important for me is in some ways surrender. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but letting go of the idea that everything has to be perfect. I think there's a certain amount of planning that can be done, and then there just has to be a surrender. And I think for me, because friend cult happens every week, there's in some ways a relentlessness about it, but in certain ways, because of that relentlessness, there's a release, right? I cannot possibly get everything perfect this Wednesday. And whatever I don't get perfect this week, I have another opportunity in 7 more days to try it again, and then again, and then again, and then again. And I think it's helped me to become much more adaptable and go with the flow. Although you can ask Matt, maybe he thinks it's still a little bit of a planner's planner. Um, but yeah, I think to just let it go. And to be honest, there are so many people that are so happy to have somebody else organizing these kinds of things. Maybe it sounds kind of trite, but nobody's looking at it with the fine-tooth comb that you're looking at it. And, maybe I don't know how this sounds, but like quite frankly, if they are, then they can go plan their own gathering, right? Um, so yeah, I think that maybe embracing that freedom a little bit and appreciating that people will appreciate what you're doing can give you a little bit of freedom to get started. Um, I think hosting 101, I mean, I think a lot of it is the ground rules, like to the extent that people feel comfortable doing that, um, that artfully closing the door and also creating this idea of pop-up rules, like thinking about the kind of gathering that you want to create, like what is the thing that you are trying to create? And then how can you help prime people for that experience, right? Is it like greeting them at the door and letting them know, like, hey, this is what I want to create? Is it something ahead of that? Is it the way what you put in the partyful invite, something, and maybe it doesn't need to be this structured. But I do think that like priming folks, people are very open to having an experience shaped for them and kind of setting the stage. And so, if you can let people know what you're hoping to create and be explicit about it, then there's much more likelihood that you will have that because you have other people who are there to help you create it or to help you maintain it.
Mm, mm. That sounds like the kind of approach that allows satisfaction while also still allowing ourselves to be in process, which with starting anything, I think can often be the trap.
Yeah, and I also think that it helps to break down barriers a little bit, both between the host and the guest, and have it feel a little bit less like there's levels. And then
Hmm.
also possibly encouraging people who are guests at those kinds of gatherings to create gatherings of their own, right? I think what's really nice about what we've created with Friend Cult is that yes, we are the ones orchestrating a lot of it, but we're also humans who are participants in Friend Cult as well, who enjoy it. And so being open and honest with the folks that come to the gatherings of things that might be challenging us or what we're working through both on a personal level as well as on a friend cult level, it opens the door to first of all allow people to contribute because I think people like contributing, and then it also shaves away this perception that you have to be like the perfectly put together hostess who has all of the answers, who's doing everything. um I don't know. I mean, not everybody's looking to plan that kind of gathering. Some people are looking to put together gatherings that are much more polished, and maybe that's a little bit more needed for those types of things. But what we've created at Friend Cult is a space where people can just be humans together. There's not really an agenda. I like to think that in a world of, you know, networking and climbing and grinding and building and whatever, at Friend Cult, you can kind of put that down and you can just be a person. And that includes the way Matt and I are just people at these kinds of gatherings. And so when there are things that we don't have the answers to, we're not necessarily expected to. And there's a little bit of co-creation of like, oh, well, we could try this or we could do that. That naturally arises when you are not trying to put yourself up here as like the hostess who has all the answers.
Mm, mm. Do you have that makes me think about feedback and like as part of experimentation, do you have a way that you gather feedback from members that that informs how you might what you might experiment with next or offer next? Or is it much more sort of casual conversation of people suggest things?
I think it's a mix. I mean, Matt and I are definitely researchers. So anytime we make a change, we have a friend called Slack channel. So we'll kind of, any big announcements, we announce it that way. And we always end with like, and let us know if you have questions. So I don't think we've done any formal research since we started outside of the initial kind of like interviews and things to kind of help us create what became Friend Cult. But generally having a culture of like, let us know. Um, and I think people take us up on that, you know. We've also had some good one-on-one conversations with folks as they tell us like, oh, hey, we have these ideas, and you know, we'll go out to dinner, folks like that, things like that, to do like smaller group conversations. But yeah, nothing officially formal.
Hmm. What is one of the gifts or some of the gifts that Friend Cult has given you?
I think one of the gifts is the fact that Oakland feels more like a neighborhood now. There were so many people. So early on, and actually still to this day, the way that we found most folks who joined Friend Cult was through paper flyers. So we made these flyers and we posted them around town. So around Lake Merritt, Grand Lake, Temescal, etc. And then people would see these flyers and then apply. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, like maybe there are people that still have those neighbors where they just like run into them and like, you know, stoop culture and things like that. But I don't think that that's as much of a thing. At least it hasn't been for me in the America that I've grown up with. And so it's been really nice to just feel like I know my neighbors a little bit more, to feel like there are people around. Um, yeah, I mean, that's, I would say, one of the biggest gifts.
Hmm. It's me, my heart warm. I'm like, oh, incidental moments with neighbors. You're like,
Yeah.
is this why we exist?
Yeah, exactly. Is this what we're supposed to have instead of living in our little boxes and like door dashing everything? Like literally go ask your neighbor for a cup of sugar.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like, oh wow, quality of life and connection. That's so beautiful. I'm really in awe of what you've created.
Thank
And
you.
even with the challenges, it sounds like it's brought so much nourishment. And that in those moments, I wonder if there's anything when it's feeling hard or it's feeling like it's challenging. Is there anything that you remind yourself of in those moments that keeps you going and wanting to create and host?
I think it's so there's twofold. I think like I personally derive a lot of joy out of seeing the community form, right? So, like in those moments where people are volunteering to walk each other's dogs or give each other rides or help each other out, you know, relationships that have formed through Friend Cult, like that's something that I really enjoy. So, I think that in and of itself is very nourishing to me. But I think in those moments where things are really difficult, like one of the things that's been really helpful is I think I mentioned a little bit before, having a community of peers to like lean on. So I think that there's the things that are inherently nourishing, and then there's the like, how do I get through this, right? And like, it's not always thinking about like the warm fuzzy moments, though that does help, but it's also having folks that I can turn to who, you know, can give to me and who can help me. So that way it doesn't feel so much like me just like pouring into this thing and creating these lovely moments, which are it obviously lovely. But having folks to turn to for support as well. You know, both inside of Friend Cult as well as, you know, through Build IRL and other groups of folks who are building communities of their own.
Hmm. Hmm. Do you mind if we share that resource or any other resources that come to mind that are really supportive for you? I wonder if you have other resources that you're like, oh, this has been so helpful that other people may also benefit from, whether they're in Oakland or in another area.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, the Build IRL folks are absolutely great. And I don't know when they're going to have another cohort, but I would definitely recommend anybody who's thinking about starting a club to reach out and apply to be part of their next cohort. Um, I don't know about a ton of other resources, which maybe is pointing out a gap. Although I do have a stack of books that I've been meaning to read on my
Hmm.
nightstand because I feel
Oh.
like everybody and their mother are writing books about gathering and community and the importance of this interconnectedness right now. Um, you know, so like The Art of Gathering obviously is a book that a lot of people, I myself included, absolutely love. Um, there's also two books that I have not read yet. One is called Relationality. And it's about by a book or by a guy named David J. And it's about kind of like more interconnected, community-driven living. Um, and then there's another book called We Should Get Together by a woman named Kat, and I'm forgetting her last name. But there's a lot of really great resources out there for folks to think about, how to pull people together and the importance of it.
Cool. Great. Well, we can put them in the show notes so that people can dive deeper from the things that you've shared. Amazing. I'm also curious about them. So I've got some homework now. um, Final question before we move into rapid fire questions. What is the legacy that you wish to leave with Friend Cult?
I think if nothing else, it comes back to our values. I think those are the legacy that I would want to live on. Conjure new culture, just like the belief and the ability to create the culture that you want to see around you. Um, Kill the stranger, you know, just interacting with people in a way that is greeting them with curiosity instead of animosity or judgment. And then choose good gods. Just in this world where so many things are fighting for your attention, and just everything is screaming and blinking, and your screens are calling you, and there's just easy dopamine everywhere. An importance and a dedication to being aware of how you're spending your attention and what you want to do with this limited time that we have. Um, I think those three things, sometimes people can have values because or a mission for their company because they feel like they're supposed to. But for us, those are things that are very important to the way that Matt and I live our lives. And they were things that fed into the creation of friend cults. And so, yeah, I think the values are something that I would like to live on and for people to embody.
Hmm. Such good values.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you want to share or say or name that you may not have yet before we move into rapid fire questions?
I don't think it's something that I haven't mentioned, but I think speaking to anybody looking to build a community, yeah, just the reinforcement of the importance of balance. I think so often it's very easy for, at least for me, and I don't know, anybody thinking of starting something might feel similarly, to like give everything your single-minded focus. And I think the truth about building a community is that it takes time and it takes dedication. And I think that we as a society tend to have a little bit of a short attention span and to want that instant gratification because we've been primed to believe it exists through, social media and entertainment and all of that. But to really build something that sustains and that lasts, there has to be a steady dedication. And so whatever you're doing, it has to be something that you can continue to do or bring other people in to do because I do feel like it's a long haul thing. There's this quote that Matt always talks about where he says, like, everybody underestimates what you can do in a year or overestimates what you can do in a year, but they underestimate what you can achieve in 10. And I think that's something that's been on my mind lately. Like 10 years seems like an interminably long amount of time. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like 10 years? But I do think that there's something to be said. You can look back in retrospect and go like, oh yeah, wow, like everything I've done has taken me to this moment. But when you're in it, it can be very easy to get impatient to say like, well, it hasn't happened yet, or it hasn't clicked, or it hasn't gelled. But I think for something like community, which I believe is very important, you can't rush human connection. You can't you can't solve that with an app or with a quick fix. It's just something that has to happen in a dedicated way over time. And in order to do that, you have to not burn out.
Balance.
Yeah.
Mm. Beautifully wise words to finish.
Thank you.
And things that I think, regardless of how many times we hear them, it's always helpful to hear them again. All right, you ready for rapid fire?
I will try to be, yes.
There's a couple of things that you've already spoken about, but we can, or already answered, but we can come back to them in a quick way. All right, question one. How do you manage communication with your community?
We use kind of a hodgepodge of things, but Slack is probably the main way. We have a friend called Slack where folks will chat, share ideas, plan other events. It's also kind of the hub of where we make our any big announcements and things like that. But we also have a texting service to kind of blast people every week to let them know where we'll be hanging out.
Mm-hmm. Great. Two, what was your major unlock from 0 to 1? Interpret that how you wish.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I think surrender, honestly. It sounds a little bit strange, but when creating something out of nothing, there's so much uncertainty, and I do not like uncertainty. And I have leaned a lot on my partner who has almost infinite faith in our ability to just create something completely new. Um, so I've relied on his faith in our ability, and then I've also had to practice just surrendering to say it will be what it will be. And I think also that opportunity to just rinse and repeat every single week has been a really good forcing function for helping me surrender on a weekly basis.
Here we go
Whether I like it,
again.
yeah, Wednesday is coming. It's always coming. So, yeah.
Okay, three. How do you get people excited about attending an event?
This is a good question. I mean, I think the people excite themselves, which is kind of nice, right? I feel like there's generally a sense that there's a buy-in of like, we believe in what Friend Cult is doing and we want to help that continue. And that kind of leads to itself. I think we've worked hard to not have this be entertainment based, right? I think it would be easy if we were planning an event and having an activity at every single thing, but then it's more like us as entertainment providers rather than creating a community space. And so while it might seem less exciting to not have like a shiny new activity every month or every week, there's just kind of a understanding of like, wow, I come to this and then I feel good at the end of the night. I just got to talk about everything and nothing, and I want to come back. And so I think folks kind of self-motivate. Like once they come and they experience it, they want to have more of it in their lives.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. And four, and final question is, how have you grown your team?
We haven't. That's the short answer. Yeah, I think that that's the biggest question for a lot of people building communities is like, how do you scale yourself? And just full transparency, we haven't yet, and we're still exploring that. So we have not figured it all out yet.
Hmm. I know you mentioned about deputizing. Is there anything you want to share on that journey?
Um, It's not baked yet. I think we have like the plans of the plans. And so I think what's nice is we have a group of willing folks like at the ready. We just have to figure out how to bring them into that. And so I think that that's the responsibility that Matt and I have as the community leader is how do you hand those things off? And so I think that there's absolutely a need for communities to have leaders, and also those leaders should not be the be all and end all. And so we're in that like middle bit right now of appreciating that we have all these folks who are willing to contribute, and then also needing to build a little bit of a structure for them to helpfully contribute.
Hmm. Well, thank you for your insight. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for Friend Cult. I'm so glad it exists. And I feel as though everything you've shared has been so relatable to nearly every single community builder that I'm excited for them to listen and to learn.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney.